Hi, I'm Christopher. This is my little brother Theodore. I'm 10 and I've been listening to Everyday Truth for a whole year now. And today we are going to be listening to Hosea chapter 8. Hope you enjoy it. Listen carefully.
Welcome to Everyday Truth with Kurt Skelly. We believe the Bible is true and relevant to everyone, everywhere, every day. If today's conversation is a help to you, take a moment to leave a review or share it with a friend. Thanks for listening. Now, let's join Kurt for today's episode.
Well, I appreciate Christopher introducing the podcast today. So Christopher, thank you for coming to the studio and doing such a great job introducing today's Bible study in Hosea chapter number 8. And I love this chapter. There are a couple verses in Hosea chapter 8 that I think will be familiar to you. And it's always great to find that familiar verse and then see it in its context. Sometimes we know a verse, but we don't really know why it's there or what the context is. And we're going to see that in a couple familiar verses today and then tomorrow. So Hosea chapter 8, verse number 1, set the trumpet to thy mouth. He cometh, or he shall come, as an eagle against the house of the Lord, because they have transgressed my covenant and trespassed against my law. So the idea of setting a trumpet to your mouth here is like the call to military action. So a trumpet sounding would sometimes be a call to worship. But in this case, it's the Lord saying the army of the Assyrians are going to come against Israel and really even against Judah, although Judah was saved, and that's a different story altogether. But God is going to allow a foreign entity, not godly themselves, but God's going to allow this as a judgment against you. And that was often the case in the Bible, that God would allow a foreign entity to have have sway among God's people. And the idea behind that is when we reject the Lord, when we reject worshiping Him, following Him, submitting to Him, then really what we're doing is rejecting His benefits as well, one of which is protection. So think about it. Israel and Judah were relatively small countries when it came to the world stage, all throughout their history. Even today, Israel's a relatively small nation. And Israel didn't have power in and of itself to stand against world powers like Egypt or like Assyria or like Babylon or like Persia or like Greece or like Rome. It didn't have power in and of itself. You know, the power that Israel had was the power of the Lord. We saw that in the Exodus out of Egypt, or the deliverance that Judah did have from Assyria, or ultimately from Babylon or Persia or those other world powers. The point is that she by herself, Israel, was weak, but with God's help, she was strong. So judgment then was a matter of God removing His protective hand from them. So what can she do without the Lord? Well, let's find out. I'm going to take my protective hand off. You've rejected me. Now let's see what happens. So in this case, Assyria was the tool that God allowed to be used to bring destruction to Israel for having rejected God. We see this happen throughout the book of Judges. So in the book of Judges in the Bible, 13 separate times the people rejected God. 13 separate times as a corporate entity, they did that which was right in their own eyes. And 13 separate times, God allowed a variety of foreign entities to come in and judge Israel. Whether that be the Philistines or whether that be the Midianites or the children of the east or the Ammonites or the Moabites or whoever it was. And so this was a common way by which God allowed judgment to come. Think about the Babylonians. That was Habakkuk's big complaint to the Lord. Lord, how could you allow such a wicked people? And God says, no, I'm not blessing them, but I'm allowing this to happen because my people have rejected knowledge. So that's what we're finding here in Hosea chapter 8 and verse 1. And I think the application is this, that when we make choices in our lives to reject God, to not follow him, to culture and tolerate known sin in our life, to be self-sufficient, then really the implication of those decisions is that we're saying, God, I don't need you. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't say, okay, God, I don't need you, but I do want your blessings. I don't need you, but I do want your protection. No, it comes as a package, doesn't it? So God is essentially saying, this is what you have chosen. You've chosen a life without me. And so this is the judgment that is entailed in that decision. In a larger way, that's what hell is. Hell is the result of a decision to say, I don't want God. I reject God. And so hell is everything that God isn't, right? It's the ultimate expression of saying, I want a place where God is not. Well, that's what hell is. Eternal separation from him. So here in verse number 1, set the trumpet in thy mouth. Assyria is coming. God is allowing this. Why? Because you've transgressed my covenant. You've trespassed against my law. I've given you a promise. I've given you precepts, and you have rejected them. Now look at verse number 2. Israel shall cry unto me, my God, we know thee. So in desperation, when these days come, in desperation, when God's hand of protection has been lifted, they'll say, but my God, I know you. I know you. You're my God, and we're your children, and we need your help. We know we have a relationship. So how does that work? When they say, but we do know God. But it's one thing to say that we know God, and it's another thing to actually know God. So knowing God in verse number 2 has nothing to do with knowing about God. I think at times the mistake that we make is we say we know God, and what that means is we know facts about God. We know information about God. But that's not the same as knowing God. Knowing God is an experiential knowing. It's I know him relationally. I know him in fellowship. I know him experientially. And these people were claiming to know God when indeed they did not know God. Watch what it says in the very next verse. Israel hath cast off the thing that is good. The enemy shall pursue him. They have set up kings, but not by me. They have made princes, and I knew it not. Of their silver and their gold have they made them idols, that they may be cut off. Thy calf, that's an idol, like a golden calf, O Samaria, the capital of Israel, hath cast thee off. Mine anger is kindled against them. How long will it be ere they attain to innocency? Now, I'll come back and explain that term here in a moment. So you might ask the question, well, then if they claimed to know God, but didn't know God, what were the ways by which they didn't know God? Are there examples of the fact that they claimed to know him, but really didn't? And God gives us 2. He gives us 2 examples that I just read. Example number 1, you claim to know me, but you're electing kings, you're appointing leadership and princes without discretion, without knowledge from me, without my approval. You're making decisions about your leadership choices, and you're completely ignoring my word, my principles, my desires. So you claim to know me, but your choice of leadership tells a different story. I wonder if that might not be a great application for our nation. Obviously, we're heading into election season, and we're talking about presidential elections and senatorial elections and gubernatorial elections. And really, the election, the appointing of leadership, the choosing of leadership in our life is a reflection of our values, of what do we think is important? What direction do we want our nation, our town, our church to go? And what the Lord was saying here is your leadership choices reflect that you don't know me, that you're not valuing my word as a primary resource in that decision. And then I think a second area in which it was evident they didn't know God was in their worship choices. So in their leadership choices, but also in their worship choices, they were choosing to worship idols. They were making false idols and they're worshiping a golden calf, like Aaron did years before. And so here they are saying verbally, we know God, but the way they worship and the leadership that they employ in their lives are telling an entirely different story. So I wonder sometimes if we don't do the same thing. If we don't say things like, I know God. I know God. I worship God. And yet when you look at a person's choice of leaders in his life, who are the people that he wants to influence him? Where are the places that he wants to be a part? How does he worship and where and when? All of those questions tell the real story about a person's fidelity to God, about a person's real relationship with, a person's real knowledge of God. So here are people saying they know God, but their behaviors, their value choices, their worship choices are telling an entirely different story. Did you hear what it said there at the end of verse number 5? It says, mine anger, God says, is kindled against them. How long will it be ere they attain to innocency? When are they going to act like truly innocent, like an innocent child? Like an innocent child has no trouble with relationships. An innocent child hugs dad and loves dad and follows dad and wants to know dad and wants to act like dad. And that's the glory of a relationship. When you see a dad with a son or a mom with a daughter. And what the Lord says here is, when is that going to be? When is it going to be like that early relationship? He talked about this in Jeremiah. When you followed me like a little child, you didn't have anything but me. It didn't make a difference how big our house was. It didn't make a difference how many toys you had. You just wanted to spend time with dad. When is that going to happen? That's why Jesus would often say, except you become as a little child, you shall in no wise enter into the kingdom. Why? Because children have a sincerity of faith, and children have a humility. And the faith and humility, the trust of a child, that's what the Lord's looking for. I think religion, we've become way too grown up. We've become way too dependent upon self. And we need to get back to the place of the innocent relationship, the innocent trust of a child. Did you hear what God said? My anger has been kindled. To kindle something means you build it over time. We don't serve a reactionary God that gets mad at the flash of a moment. No, we serve a God that's slow to anger, who puts up with us, who watches like a slow-moving freight train our departure, and has called out to us time and time again. And yet over time, that anger is kindled. And God has to ask the question, where are you? Where is that sweet, innocent, faithful, humble relationship that once existed? Those were great questions that the Lord asked of that nation so many years ago, and they're great questions that the Lord asks us today. Do you know God? Do you know God? Not just here, up in your head, but do you know him in your heart? Do you have a real and bona fide, ongoing, experiential relationship with him? Good question to end with today. I'll let you chew on that one. We're going to come back to verse number 6 next episode. Hope you'll join us. God bless you, my friends.